Have you ever stared at your phone while it's ringing, watching the screen light up like it's about to explode, and instead of answering, you just let it ring? Not because you're busy, not because you didn't see it, but because something inside you went, nope, not today. And then, a few seconds later, you breathe out in relief like you just avoided a small emotional disaster. If that feels familiar, you're not broken, you're not rude, and you're definitely not alone. There's actually a very real psychology behind why some people hate phone calls. What's funny is that culturally, phone calls are supposed to be the most normal thing in the world. They've been around for over a century. For a long time, calling someone was the main way humans stayed connected at a distance. But somehow, in the last decade or two, a quiet shift happened. For a lot of people, especially deep thinkers, introverts, anxious minds, or just emotionally sensitive humans, phone calls started to feel intense, uncomfortable, invasive even. And the weird part is, it's not always about the person on the other end. Sometimes it's about what the phone call represents to your brain. Think about this. A text message gives you control. You can read it when you're ready, you can think, you can rewrite, you can choose your tone, you can even ignore it for a while without it feeling like an emergency. But a phone call demands your presence right now. It's the psychological equivalent of someone knocking on your door without warning. Your brain doesn't get time to warm up. It has to switch modes instantly, from whatever world you were in into social performance mode. And your brain hates sudden mode switches. Neuroscientists talk about something called cognitive load, which is basically how much mental effort your brain is using at any given time. When you're scrolling, daydreaming, working, or even just relaxing, your brain is in a certain rhythm. A phone call interrupts that rhythm violently. It says, drop everything. Someone needs your voice, your attention, your emotions, your reactions, now. For some people, that feels energizing. For others, it feels like being yanked out of a dream. And here's where it gets interesting. When you're on a call, you lose all visual context. You can't see facial expressions, you can't read body language, you can't tell if the other person is smiling, bored, distracted, or offended. So your brain fills in the gaps, and human brains are terrible at filling in gaps neutrally. We tend to imagine the worst. Are they judging me? Did I sound weird? Was that pause awkward? Did I respond too fast? Too slow? Did I laugh at the wrong time? So in a way, phone calls force your brain into constant real-time social interpretation with incomplete data. It's like playing a video game with half the screen missing. No wonder it feels stressful. For people who are naturally more self-aware, reflective, or anxious, this is amplified. These minds already run a lot of internal commentary. They already analyze themselves. A phone call doesn't just require conversation, it requires performance, voice tone, timing, emotional responsiveness, humor, empathy, all at once. And you don't get a second draft. Text gives you editing. Calls don't. There's also something deeply psychological about voice itself. Hearing someone's voice activates emotional centers in the brain more strongly than reading their words. It's more intimate, more real, more direct, which means it also feels more exposing. When you text, you can hide behind the screen. When you speak, your voice carries mood, energy, insecurity, boredom, excitement, all of it, even when you try to mask it. So if you're someone who's emotionally sensitive or someone who feels things deeply, phone calls can feel like emotional nakedness. You're suddenly seen, heard, perceived, and not on your own terms. Another layer is control over time. A text message has a clear structure. You send, they respond. End of interaction. A phone call has no clear ending. You don't know if it'll last 2 minutes or 45. Your brain hates open-ended commitments, especially if you're already mentally tired. So even the thought of answering can trigger subtle stress. What if they want to talk for long? What if I can't escape politely? What if I get trapped in small talk purgatory? And yes, your brain actually keeps score of past experiences. If you've ever had phone calls that drained you, overwhelmed you, brought bad news, awkward silences, conflict, or emotional labor, your nervous system remembers. It learns. It associates ringing with effort, with unpredictability, with emotional cost. So the next time your phone rings, your body reacts before your mind even catches up. A slight tension in your chest, a small spike of cortisol, a quiet urge to avoid. That's not laziness, that's conditioning. There's also a generational shift happening. Many people today grew up with texting, messaging apps, voice notes, and asynchronous communication. The brain adapted to a slower, more controlled social rhythm. So phone calls feel like a foreign language. It's not that younger minds are antisocial. It's that they're used to processing connection in written form, in curated form, in manageable doses. A phone call bypasses all of that and demands raw interaction. And raw interaction is intense. But here's the deeper philosophical part. For a lot of people, hating phone calls isn't about disliking people. It's about protecting mental space. Modern life is already loud. Notifications, messages, content, deadlines, expectations. Your brain is constantly being pulled in different directions. A phone call feels like one more demand on an already overloaded system, one more voice asking for emotional energy you might not have at that moment. So when you avoid calls, sometimes what you're really doing is saying, I need quiet, I need control, I need space to exist without being perceived for a moment. And that's actually very human. There's even research showing that people with higher levels of introspection and inner dialogue tend to prefer text-based communication because their internal world is rich, busy, complex. They don't want constant external interruptions. They want time to process, to choose words carefully, to respond from a thoughtful place instead of a reactive one. Phone calls force immediacy, and immediacy can feel violent to reflective minds. But there's also a subtle emotional fear hiding underneath for some people. Phone calls remove distance, and distance feels safe. When you text, you're separated by time, space, and silence. When you call, that distance collapses. You're suddenly emotionally close. And closeness, for people who've been hurt, misunderstood, or overwhelmed in the past, can feel risky. It's not that you don't care. Sometimes you care too much, and caring makes you cautious. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to disappoint. You don't want to reveal too much or too little, so you avoid the situation altogether. Not consciously, but subtly, letting it ring, telling yourself you'll call back later, feeling guilty, then relieved, then guilty again. It becomes a loop. And ironically, the more you avoid calls, the bigger they feel in your mind. Your brain turns them into events instead of moments. The ringing becomes dramatic, the anticipation grows, the anxiety spikes, until a simple, "Hey, how are you?" feels like a psychological mountain. But here's the compassionate reframe. Hating phone calls doesn't mean you're antisocial. It often means you're sensitive to stimulation, aware of your energy, protective of your mental space. It means your brain likes depth over speed, meaning over noise, intentional connection over forced interaction. In a world that constantly demands immediate access to you, not wanting to be instantly available is actually a form of self-respect. The goal isn't to force yourself into loving phone calls. The goal is to understand your relationship with them, to notice what exactly you're reacting to. Is it the unpredictability, the emotional exposure, the lack of control, the fear of awkwardness, the exhaustion of social performance? Once you see the real trigger, it becomes less about avoidance and more about choice. You might still not love calls, but you won't feel broken for it. You'll know your brain's logic, you'll know your nervous system's patterns, and that awareness alone softens the anxiety. Because the truth is, your dislike of phone calls isn't random. It's your mind trying to manage energy, safety, and connection in the best way it knows how. And maybe that's the deeper message here. Not every personality is wired for constant real-time interaction. Some minds need space, some hearts need time, some souls communicate better in silence, in text, in pauses between words. So the next time your phone rings and you hesitate, instead of judging yourself, just notice what's happening inside. The tension, the thoughts, the instinct to retreat. That moment says more about your inner world than about your social skills. And understanding your inner world is always more powerful than forcing yourself to act like someone else's. If this made you reflect on your own relationship with communication, connection, or emotional energy, you might want to sit with that for a moment, or even share it in the comments. Sometimes the most interesting psychology isn't about changing who you are, but finally understanding why you are the way you are. And once you understand that, even a ringing phone feels a little less intimidating.